The kid behind the counter picked the bat up with one hand, swung it lazily at nothing, and set it back on the glass. "Yeah, old bat. Louisville Slugger looks like. We get these. I can do $10. Walter Broom stood on the other side of the counter. 80 years old, the black Pittsburgh Pirates cap he'd worn since 1979, faded to dark charcoal, the old baseball bat lying on the glass between them. And watched a 24-year-old in an ironworks pawn polo look at the bat his father had used to hit him grounders in the backyard every evening for 20 years and see $10 worth of old ash. "That was my daddy's," Walter said, quiet. The kid, Keller, by the crooked name tag, shrugged and rolled the bat a quarter turn on the glass with his palm. "Sure. 10. Final." Here's what that kid in the pawn shop didn't know. Here's what nobody in that shop knew. The old baseball bat Walter Broom had just set on that counter was worth $127,000. It was a Hillerick and Bradsby Louisville Slugger, model 40 JG, 35 inches, 36 ounces, heavier than any bat in modern baseball. The barrel was wrapped in a thick crust of pine tar and rosin from decades of use. The handle was wound in 3 layers of black electrical tape, so old it had fused into a hard resin-like shell. The bat looked like what it appeared to be, a beat-up old slugger that had been taped and tarred and swung 10,000 times by a man who didn't care what it looked like as long as it hit. But under the pine tar on the barrel, under the dark amber crust that decades of grip and weather had built up, there was a name. A facsimile signature burned into the ash by the Hillerick and Bradsby factory in Louisville, Kentucky, the way they burned every professional player's name into every bat they made for him. The signature read, Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson was born in 1911 in Buena Vista, Georgia, and died in 1947 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the age of 35, 3 months before Jackie Robinson took the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers and broke the color barrier that had kept Gibson out of the major leagues for his entire career. Gibson played for the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, 2 of the greatest Negro League teams in history, both based in Pittsburgh. He was a catcher. He was the greatest power hitter the Negro Leagues ever produced. He was called the Black Babe Ruth, though some said Ruth should have been called the White Josh Gibson. He hit nearly 800 home runs in his career. The exact number is disputed because Negro League records were not kept with the precision of the major leagues, because the major leagues had decided that black men were not worth counting. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1972. In 2024, Major League Baseball officially incorporated Negro League statistics into its record books, and Josh Gibson became, retroactively, the all-time leader in single-season batting average. Fewer than a dozen authenticated Josh Gibson game-used bats were known to exist anywhere in the world. The last one to surface at auction, at Hunt Auctions in 2019, had sold for $145,000. Walter's father, James Broom, had worked as a groundskeeper at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh from 1939 to 1958, 19 years of mowing the outfield, lining the base paths, and raking the infield dirt. Forbes Field was the home of the Pittsburgh Pirates, but it was also the Pittsburgh home field for the Homestead Grays, who played many of their home games there in the 1930s and 1940s. The Grays players used the same dugouts, the same bat racks, the same clubhouse. And when the games were over and the players had gone, the groundskeepers cleaned up. Players left things behind. Broken bats, cracked bats, bats they'd outgrown or replaced. James Broom had brought one home in the summer of 1943, not because he knew whose bat it was, but because it was a good bat that wasn't broken, and he played sandlot ball on Sundays with the men from his church. James had taped the handle with electrical tape because the grip was worn smooth. He had never removed the tape. He had never cleaned the pine tar off the barrel. He had hit with that bat every Sunday for 28 years. Sandlot games in Shenley Park, batting practice with Walter and Walter's brothers in the backyard of the house on Wiley Avenue in the Hill District, church league softball, until his knees gave out in 1971. He had never looked at the barrel under the pine tar. There had been no reason to. It was a bat. It hit. That was enough. This is the story of how Walter Broom walked into Ironworks Pawn on a Monday morning in February with $510 of trouble in his head, and walked out with the discovery that the bat his father had taped and tarred and used to hit him grounders in the backyard had been swung in a game at Forbes Field by the greatest power hitter who ever lived, a man who was never allowed to play in the major leagues because of the color of his skin. Before I tell you what happened when the expert walked through that door, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you about Walter. Walter James Broom was born in 1944 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father, James Broom, was a groundskeeper, 19 years at Forbes Field, then 7 more at Three Rivers Stadium until he retired in 1965. His mother, Lottie, worked the laundry at Mercy Hospital for 31 years. Walter grew up in the Hill District, the historically black neighborhood above downtown Pittsburgh that had produced some of the greatest musicians, athletes, and writers in American history, and that urban renewal had torn half of it down in the 1950s to build the Civic Arena. Walter went to Shenley High, graduated in 1962, did 4 years in the Army, 2 at Fort Dix, 2 in Vietnam, came home and spent 35 years as a maintenance mechanic at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. Married Charlene Davis in 1968. One son, James, named for Walter's father, now 54 and living in Penn Hills. Charlene had died in 2023 of complications from diabetes. Slow, 2 years of dialysis, 3 months of hospice, gone on a Wednesday in March. The furnace was the problem. The gas furnace in the basement of the small brick row house on Wiley Avenue, the same house Walter had grown up in, the same house his father had raised him in, had cracked its heat exchanger in January. The heating contractor had quoted $510 for the repair. Without it, Walter was running space heaters and wearing his coat inside, and the gas company had sent a warning letter about the carbon monoxide risk. His water authority pension was $1,340 a month. Social Security added $2,190. After property taxes, insurance, gas, electric, his diabetes medications, and the blood pressure medications, and groceries, he had about $85 of slack in a good month. He did not have $510. He could have called James in Penn Hills. James was a bus driver for the Port Authority with 2 kids, one at Community College of Allegheny County and one starting at Pitt in the fall. Walter had not asked his son for $1 in 16 years. He was not going to start over a furnace. For 14 days, he wore his coat inside and ran the space heaters and cracked a window in the kitchen because the gas company's letter had scared him. On the 15th morning, Monday, he went to the hall closet. The bat stood in the back corner of the closet behind the vacuum cleaner and Charlene's winter coat that Walter had not moved. It had been there since 1996, the year James Sr. died, when Walter had brought it home from his father's room at the VA nursing home, along with the pirate's cap and a shoebox of photographs. Before that, the bat had leaned against the wall beside the back door of this same house for 53 years. From 1943, the year James had brought it home from Forbes Field, to 1996, the year James had gone to the VA. The bat was heavy, 36 ounces, almost a full half-pound heavier than any bat used in the major leagues today. The barrel was coated in a thick layer of dried pine tar and rosin that had built up over decades of use, giving it a dark amber-brown color that obscured the ash underneath. The handle was wrapped in 3 layers of old black electrical tape, fused solid. The knob was scuffed and dented from being tapped against cleats and dropped on concrete. There was no visible name on the bat. The pine tar covered the barrel where the facsimile signature would have been, and the tape covered the handle where the model number would have been. James Broom had never told Walter whose bat it was, because James had never known. He had told Walter the bat's story exactly once, in 1972, standing in the backyard on Wiley Avenue with a bucket of old baseballs. "I picked that bat up at Forbes Field in '43, James had said. After a Grays game, players left bats behind all the time. I don't know whose it was, some Grays player. It was a good bat, heavy. I taped the handle because the grip was worn out. I've been hitting with it ever since. Walter had nodded. He had been 28. He had not thought about it again. James Broom had been a man who took care of things. He had mowed the Forbes Field outfield in perfect stripes. He had lined the base paths chalk white and razor straight. He had raked the infield dirt until it was smooth enough to eat off. And when he found a bat that wasn't broken and wasn't claimed, he had taken it home and taped the handle and used it with the same quiet care he used on everything. He had never wondered whose name was under the pine tar. He had never scraped it to look. The bat hit well. That was the only credential James had ever needed. Walter sat at the kitchen table that Monday morning with the bat leaning against his chair and the heating contractor's estimate on the table, and he did something he'd sworn he would never do. He put the bat in the back seat of the car and drove to town. The 2004 Ford Taurus had 198,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on since 2021. Walter drove the 3 miles to Ironworks Pawn on East Carson Street on the south side and parked at 9:12 on a cold gray February morning. He sat in the car with the bat on the back seat. He looked at it in the rearview mirror. He thought about his father in the backyard on Wiley Avenue, tossing grounders to him and his brothers on summer evenings in the 1950s, the bat cracking against the old baseballs, the hill district spreading out below them, the steel mills smoking on the river, the sky turning orange. He took the bat in both hands and went inside. The bell over the door jangled. Keller was behind the counter on his phone and looked up after about 8 seconds. "Help you?" "I've got an old baseball bat. My daddy's Louisville Slugger." "Let's see it." Walter set the bat on the glass counter. Keller picked it up with one hand by the taped handle and swung it lazily at nothing. He turned the barrel, looking at the pine tar crust. He squinted. "Yeah, old Slugger. Taped up. Can't even read what model it is. We get old bats, Little League trophies, garage stuff. Can't sell them unless they're signed by somebody. $10. It's from Forbes Field. My daddy was a groundskeeper there. He picked it up after a Grays game and—" "Sure, Pops." Keller set the bat down on the glass with a solid wooden thunk. He rolled it a quarter turn with his palm. 10. Take it or leave it." Walter's hands were flat on the counter. His jaw was tight. He thought about the furnace. He thought about Charlene in the dialysis chair 3 times a week for 2 years. He thought about his father raking the infield dirt at Forbes Field, a black man maintaining a field where black players were not allowed to play in the major leagues, where the Grays played as guests in a stadium that was not theirs, in a country that counted their home runs only when it felt like it. He did not pick up the bat. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He stood there with both hands flat on the glass and his mouth closed tight, because the only other thing he could do was cry in front of a 24-year-old, and Walter Broom had not cried in front of another human being since Charlene's funeral in 2023. The bell over the door jangled again. A man came in. Early 60s, black, tall and lean, with a shaved head, a neatly trimmed salt and pepper goatee, and rectangular black frame glasses. He wore a dark navy peacoat over a cream turtleneck and dark trousers, polished brown Oxford shoes, and a small gold lapel pin in the shape of a baseball that Walter, if he'd looked closely, would have recognized as the insignia of the Negro League's Baseball Museum. He carried a small black leather portfolio and a brown canvas tote bag that said NLBM, Kansas City, on the side. He came 2 steps inside, glanced at the counter, and stopped. He looked at the bat. He tilted his head. He took another step. His eyes moved from the pine tar barrel to the taped handle to the knob. He looked at the weight of the bat, the way it lay on the glass, heavier than a modern bat would lie. He looked at the barrel diameter, wider than modern, a bottle bat shape that hadn't been popular since the 1940s. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried, with the precise cadence of a man who had spent his career making sure the right names were remembered. "Sir, Is that a pre-war Louisville slugger? Keller looked up. Old guy's selling. $10. The man did not look at Keller. He looked at Walter. Sir. My name is Dr. Raymond Saunders. I am the Chief Historian and Director of Collections at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. I also serve on the authentication panel for Hunt Auction's Sports Memorabilia Division. I am in Pittsburgh this week because we are preparing an exhibit on the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays in partnership with the Senator John Hines History Center. I came into this shop because I always stop in pawn shops in Pittsburgh. This city has more Negro League history per square mile than any city in America. Would you permit me to examine that bat? Walter found his voice. You're asking me. It's yours, isn't it? It was my daddy's. Then yes, sir. I'm asking you. And I would ask you, please, not to let anyone swing that bat again. If this is what I think it might be, the stress of a swing on 80-year-old ash could crack the barrel. Keller put the bat down and stepped back. Doctor. Saunders set his portfolio on the counter and opened it. He drew out a pair of thin white cotton handling gloves, a 10x jeweler's loop, a small LED pen light, a soft chamois, a small blacklight UV flashlight, a single-edge razor blade in a plastic safety holder, and a leather-bound field notebook. He pulled the gloves on finger by finger. May I? Walter nodded. Dr. Saunders lifted the bat with both gloved hands, one under the barrel, one under the handle, and laid it on the chamois. He examined the knob. He examined the handle. He examined the barrel. He shone the blacklight UV flashlight along the length of the barrel, moving slowly, reading the way the pine tar had layered over the decades. Then he did something no one had done in 81 years. He took the single-edge razor blade from its safety holder and, with the precision of a surgeon, scraped a small patch of dried pine tar from the barrel, about 2 inches long, half an inch wide, in the area where Louisville Slugger branded their professional model facsimile signatures. The pine tar came off in thin amber flakes. Beneath it, the bare ash was pale and clean, protected from light and air for 81 years by the pine tar that had sealed it. And on the bare ash, burned into the wood by the Hillerick and Bradsby factory in Louisville, Kentucky, in a flowing facsimile script, was a name: Josh Gibson. Dr. Saunders set the razor blade down on the chamois. He set both gloved hands flat on the counter. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He did not speak for several seconds. "Oh," he said, very quietly. Then, in a voice that had changed, not louder, deeper, "Oh my God." He picked the bat up again. He turned it slowly. He shone the LED pen light across the signature. He read it through the loop. He scraped a second small patch of pine tar from the handle area, carefully, precisely, and found the model number burned into the ash, 40JG. 40JG, he said. Josh Gibson, Model 40. He set the bat down on the chamois with a deliberateness that made the air in the shop feel different. Mr. Broom, Walter Broom. Mr. Broom, this is a Hillerick and Bradsby Louisville Slugger, professional Model 40JG, made for Josh Gibson. He paused. He took a breath. Josh Gibson was the greatest power hitter in the history of the Negro Leagues. He played for the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, both based here in Pittsburgh. He was a catcher. He hit nearly 800 home runs. He was called the Black Babe Ruth, though anyone who knew the game knew it should have been the other way around. He died in 1947, 3 months before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, 3 months before the door opened that Josh Gibson had spent his whole career standing outside of. The fluorescent tube over the door flickered. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1972. In 2024, Major League Baseball incorporated Negro League statistics into its official records, and Josh Gibson became, retroactively, the all-time single-season batting average leader. He looked at the bat on the chamois. Mr. Broom, fewer than a dozen authenticated Josh Gibson game-used bats are known to exist anywhere in the world. The last one to surface at auction, Hunt Auctions 2019, sold for $145,000. That bat was in display condition, clean, no tape, no pine tar. He paused. This bat is different. This bat was used for 81 years, first by Gibson at Forbes Field, then by your father for decades of sandlot ball and batting practice. The pine tar is Gibson's original grip compound. I can see the layering under UV light. The tape is your father's addition. This bat has 2 men's lives in it, Mr. Broom, Gibson's and your father's. The pine tar sealed the signature like a time capsule. The ash underneath the tar is in near-perfect condition, protected from light and oxygen for 81 years. He looked at Walter. At professional appraisal through Hunt Auctions, with authentication from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and Hillerick and Bradsby's historical records, which document every professional model bat they shipped, including the 40 JG models made for Josh Gibson, this bat would be valued between $110,000 and $150,000. Conservative estimate, $127,000. Keller had not moved. His phone was face down. His hands were at his sides. He did not say anything about $20. He did not say anything at all. Walter was sitting on the stool beside the counter. He was looking at the bat, at the small patch of bare ash where the pine tar had been scraped away, at the flowing script that said Josh Gibson. And he was thinking about his father. He was thinking about James Broom raking the infield at Forbes Field on a summer afternoon in 1943. The Grays game just finished, the players gone to the clubhouse, and James walking along the dugout with his rake and finding a bat in the bat rack, unclaimed, heavy, good ash, picking it up, feeling the weight, taking it home. He was thinking about what it meant that a black groundskeeper at Forbes Field in 1943, a man who maintained a field where black players were allowed to play only as guests in a league that existed only because the other league would not have them, had taken home the bat of the greatest hitter in that guest league and had never known whose bat it was, had taped the handle and hit grounders to his sons with it in the backyard, and had never scraped the pine tar to look at the name underneath because the name did not matter to James Broom. The bat hit well. That was enough. But the name mattered now. The name mattered because Josh Gibson had died at 35 without ever playing in the major leagues, and because the bat that bore his name had spent 81 years in a closet and a backyard and a hall closet in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, the same neighborhood where Gibson had lived, the same streets Gibson had walked, the same city that had watched him hit home runs over the Forbes Field scoreboard and had done nothing to put him in the lineup of the team that played there every day. "My daddy raked that field," Walter said. His voice was not steady. "He raked it for the Pirates and he raked it for the Grays. Same field, same dirt, different leagues." Dr. Saunders looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, sir," he said. "Same field, same dirt, different country." Dr. Saunders handed Walter his card. "Mr. Broom, take your time. Talk to your son. But please, sir, do not leave this bat in this shop. Do not swing it. Do not remove the tape. The tape is part of the provenance now. Your father's tape and Gibson's pine tar. Both men are in this bat." Walter nodded. He watched Dr. Saunders wrap the bat in the chamois and hand it to him with both gloved hands. Walter took the bat. He held it against his chest the way his father had held it, walking home from Forbes Field in 1943. He nodded once at Dr. Saunders. He walked out past Keller without a word. In the parking lot, sitting in the Taurus with the check engine light glowing orange on the dashboard, Walter Broom held the bat against his chest and cried for the first time since Charlene's funeral. He called James that night. James drove over from Penn Hills the next morning. They sat at the kitchen table on Wiley Avenue with the bat on the chamois between them, the small scraped patches showing Josh Gibson in burned script. James, who had been named for a grandfather who had raked the field where Gibson played, held the bat in both hands and said, "Grandpa hit me grounders with this. Every summer. This bat." "This bat," Walter said. "Josh Gibson's bat. Josh Gibson's bat." They sat there for a long time. James turned the bat slowly in his hands. He could feel the weight, 36 ounces, the weight of a man who hit the ball harder than anyone who ever lived. They called Dr. Saunders at 9. The Negro League's Baseball Museum sent a conservator and a bat specialist to Pittsburgh in March. The pine tar was carefully removed from the barrel, a 3-day process involving archival solvents applied by cotton swab, 1 square inch at a time. The full facsimile signature was revealed. Josh Gibson, in Hillerick and Bradsby's flowing professional model script. The model number, 40JG, was confirmed. The Hillerick and Bradsby Historical Archive in Louisville confirmed that Model 40JG bats were shipped to Josh Gibson at the Homestead Grays address in Pittsburgh in shipments dated 1941, 1943, and 1945. The ash was species-matched to the Hillerick and Bradsby timber supply from that era. Authentication was unanimous. The Negro League's Baseball Museum acquired the bat for permanent display through a 99-year family loan. The museum paid the Broom family $119,000. The bat went on display in the museum's Josh Gibson Gallery in Kansas City in June. Mounted horizontally in a custom case with the full signature visible, the electrical tape still on the handle, the pine tar residue still visible on the barrel around the cleaned signature area. The placard read, Hillerick and Bradsby Louisville Slugger, Model 40JG, Game Bat, Josh Gibson, 1911 to 1947, Homestead Grays. Recovered from Forbes Field, Pittsburgh, 1943, by groundskeeper James Broom, 1917 to 1996. Used by Broom for sandlot ball and batting practice for 28 years. The handle tape was applied by Broom. The pine tar is Gibson's original grip compound. Both men's hands are in this bat, on loan from the family of Walter J. Broom, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. James drove his father to Kansas City for the dedication. Walter wore the dark suit he'd worn to Charlene's funeral and the faded pirate's cap. He stood in front of the case for a long time. The bat. Gibson's name. His father's tape. "You carried his bat home, Daddy," Walter said, quiet enough that only James heard him. "You carried the greatest hitter's bat home and you hit me grounders with it, and you never knew." He paused. But he would have liked that. Gibson would have liked that. A man taking his bat home and using it, not putting it in a case, using it. That's what bats are for. He paid for the furnace. He paid the property taxes 3 years forward. He sent James $30,000 and told him to use it for the kids' school and not to argue. He set up a trust for his 2 grandchildren. He had the front steps of the Wiley Avenue house repaired. They had been crumbling since the city had torn up the sidewalk in 2017 and never come back to fix the damage. He bought Charlene a new headstone with her full name and a line beneath that read, "Wife, Mother." She kept the house warm. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran the story on a Sunday. The Pittsburgh Courier, the historic black newspaper, ran a long feature. ESPN ran a segment. The New York Times ran the story in the sports section. MLB Network ran a special on Josh Gibson's legacy using the bat discovery as the opening. A letter came to Walter's post office box in August. It was from a 91-year-old man in Homestead, Pennsylvania, named George Tinker. George's father, Albert Tinker, had been Josh Gibson's neighbor in the Hill District in the 1940s. George, who had been a boy of 10 in 1943, wrote that he remembered Josh Gibson hitting a ball over the roof of the house across the street during a pickup game on Wiley Avenue in the summer of 1943. George wrote that the bat Gibson had used that afternoon was missing its grip tape, the handle was smooth and worn, and that Gibson had joked about needing to get it taped. George wrote that the bat had gone missing from Forbes Field later that summer. "I think your daddy found it," George wrote, "and I think Josh wouldn't have minded. Your daddy took care of things. That's what a groundskeeper does." Walter read the letter 3 times. He put it in the hall closet, in the spot where the bat had stood for 28 years. And the next Saturday morning, back home in Pittsburgh, Walter sat down at his usual booth at Pamela's Diner in the Strip District with his 2 oldest friends, Leon Mercer and Curtis Pitts, the way he had every Saturday for 26 years. Leon looked at him over the rim of his coffee mug. Heard you made the Post-Gazette, Walter. Heard that. Josh Gibson, huh? Josh Gibson. Curtis shook his head. $10. $10, Walter agreed. The three of them laughed, the quiet, chest-deep laugh of old men who have lived long enough to know that the world rarely sees what matters and that sometimes, if you wait long enough, it finally does. A kid in a pawn shop looked at that bat and said $10. He didn't know. They never do. If stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, because some things have hidden worth